So let's return now to politics. Joining me, Simon Banks and Peter McGauran. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. A lot of foreign policy on the agenda this week as the Prime Minister's arrived in New York. Simon, he's obviously got the UK and Canada with him in doing this, but a big move in recognising overnight a Palestinian state.
Yes, it is, and obviously the formal recognition of that will take place at the UN, I think later on today, Australian time. Look, an important state in terms of the development of politics within that region. I think one of the concerns that the Australian government's had, and we've even seen it from the reaction, unfortunately, from the Netanyahu regime over the last sort of 24 hours or so, which is that rather than accepting that there are actually friends of Israel that are very concerned about the way in which the regime is taking its approach to the war in Gaza and more generally its approach to the West Bank, which of course is not controlled by Hamas, they seem to be doubling down and threatening the existence of a future Palestinian state. Well, I think that's the wrong approach. I think they've been put on notice, they've been warned consistently since the awful terror attacks occurred by Hamas on October 7th, that they need to take a different approach, and unfortunately they're just not listening to friend or foe alike.
Peter McGauran, how do you reflect on this international push for Palestinian recognition at the same time that we see the ongoing violence in the Middle East, and we've seen appalling violence indeed from Hamas against what they say are collaborators with public executions. So clearly the government's saying that Hamas can't be part of any future Palestinian state. The question is, how do you guarantee that?
Well, you can't, Kieran. I think it's one of the most immoral and disastrous political decisions in the history of Australian diplomacy. There's no Palestinian state to recognise, as evidenced by Hamas's ongoing brutality and cruelty against their own people, especially using them as human shields, not to mention the ongoing torturous conditions at least, of the Israeli hostages. Albanese should never have done that. It's the only thing Trump's going to raise with him in New York. If Albanese does get a meeting with Trump, it'll be a very short one, basically a corridor discussion, and Trump's not going to want to talk about AUKUS or about tariffs or about the ban on children's access to social media. He'll only have one topic at the UN in the time given, and that will be his criticism of Australia's stance.
Simon Banks, is that a risk here, given it's been so long for this face-to-face meeting to eventuate?
Well, look, obviously hope face-to-face and a detailed meeting takes place. But look, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the UK, met with President Trump just a few days ago, and whilst this was raised as a very small part of those conversations, the truth is the United States, the UK and Australia have far more considerable interest when it comes to issues like AUKUS, like trade and those sorts of considerations. I think that, when they do get to have a sort of a sit down and a more detailed discussion, that will overwhelmingly be the focus of those discussions. And I'm not just making that up for the sake of it. The answer is we have the meeting from Prime Minister Starmer with President Trump from just a couple of days ago as proof of the way that President Trump will treat these issues.
Peter McGauran, it's hard to predict anything around President Trump. He is unpredictable. That's one of his strengths, I guess, in a diplomatic sense as well. But for Prime Minister Albanese and those close to him, the sense is you get they're not that worried about whether they get the face-to-face or not, given how in the broad population in Australia, Mr Trump is unpopular.
Agreed. Albanese doesn't fear the inability to get a meeting with Trump domestically. I agree with that. But Simon would have to agree the circumstances of Trump dealing with Starmer and brushing over the UK's recognition of Palestine as a state is completely different to the setting in which Albanese, if he does get a meeting with Trump, will be. So there's no comparison. Look, I sad to say, I think the Australian diplomatic effort in the United States is falling apart. It's not just Trump. Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, has a loathing for Australia. He regards them as socialists, and he's the king of MAGA in the White House. Peter Navarro has an axe to grind, who's Chief of Trade Negotiations with Australia, thinking they got away easily in the first Trump. We don't have any influence in the White House. Then we've got the problem where Kevin Rudd's strategy is largely based in the Congress, gathering together friends of Australia. Well, that's pretty low-hanging fruit, but he had to do it. We've seen a letter from some of the most powerful Republican senators, Ted Cruz, John Corman, Rick Scott, to Albanese, criticising Australia for their stand on Palestine. I don't see where the solid basis of support for Australia now lies in the US.
Peter McGauran, Simon Banks, gentlemen, great to see you both. We'll catch you next week and we can look at the wash-up of what is, as I say, a big week internationally.